Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Common, the one you've all been waiting for, Nobody's Smiling. It's hard to tackle legends, especially when certain legends easily made 4 albums that I would consider bona fide classics. Especially when those legends aren't just significant to the music, but the culture that surrounds that music. Artists responsible for some of the most powerfully gripping and intelligent conscious hip-hop that also managed to be accessible to any audience willing to take the time in order to listen to it. Yeah, I'm talking about Common, the Chicago rapper known best for his collaborations with No ID, The Roots, Erykah Badu, and Kanye West, who has earned a ton of critical acclaim for a succession of albums in the 90s and in the mid-2000s that is damn close to masterpieces. The man is witty, intelligent, and has a very solid flow, and is incredibly charismatic behind the microphone. And he has had the imagination and creativity to make some socially conscious and challenging records, both lyrically and instrumentally. Hell, while I won't say that his 2002 effort Electric Circus works all the way through, it doesn't, mostly due to a broad lack of lyrical focus. It's certainly a fascinating listen, even today, with some genuinely inspired musical ideas that I wish he had pushed a little bit further. But after his brilliant 2005 soulful success in B, Common has struggled somewhat. Finding Forever felt like a less inspired sequel to his last record, and Universal Mind Control showed Common dumbing it down to disastrous results. And by the time Common released The Dreamer, The Believer in 2011, I was just a little bit uncertain where Common seemed to be looking to go with his music, especially as that album tried to toe the line between easygoing party tracks and the conscious rap for which he's most known for. There was a balance there, but I don't know, it didn't quite work for me. Granted, the album was decent, but it was nowhere near his greats, and it did feel just a little bit uninspired at points. That's just me talking. But with the escalating gang violence in Chicago, which has only intensified over the past few years, and the growing number of Chicago MCs either speaking up or reveling in it, I knew that it was only a matter of time before Common returned to his roots and spoke on this matter directly with his newest album, Nobody's Smiling. And frankly, I was really interested. Not only was one of the strongest MCs in Chicago going to be addressing this critically ignored issue, he was going to speak to it with familiarity and a serious grit that was bound to draw some real interest to this issue. So I made sure to take my time and really delve into Nobody's Smiling by Common. How is it? Well, here's the thing. It's probably Common's best record in almost a decade in terms of consistency, instrumentation, wordplay, and subject matter, but at the same time, it's the sort of record that I just wish was a little bit better at the level of his classics. So, no, I wouldn't say it's anything close to Common's best work, but you know what? It's definitely a step in the right direction, which is appreciated. Granted, I think, honestly, my biggest issue with this album is that it's just a step in the right direction. But if you're looking for a new Common record that has some real quality, Nobody's Smiling, it's definitely a good case and example, so it's still worth a listen or two. So okay, let's start with Common himself, and let's make this very clear. He's a very solid MC that can sound surprisingly good over this darker brand of production, both in bringing hard, aggressive rhymes and the more emotive side that's been Common's tagline for years now. Now, not all of his lyrics were fantastic right out of the gate. I always get a little bit exasperated when he rhymes words with himself, which just happen more often than I'd like on this record. But you know what? He's a talented and occasionally very creative MC that does display some surprising versatility over this sort of darker production. If I do take any issue with Common's delivery, it's more in line that he could have stood to be a little bit more aggressive, and that he's just a little bit too reserved to really explode over this more visceral production, and that just got a little bit distracting for me. Now, fortunately, the majority of his guest stars, they've got no such reserve, and Common's choice to bring in some really solid Chicago artists to back him up really does pay a lot in his dividends. Lil Herb has a hungry, visceral charge to his delivery that made his very gritty, descriptive lyrics on the neighborhood really stand out. I'll be checking out more of his stuff. Then Dreezy delivers some authoritative bars on Hustle Harder that really bellies Common's hype verses that preceded her. Really did a good job backing her up, and she delivers here. And then Malik Yusef steps up to the title track with a spoken word verse that just sends a chill down my spine every time I I've heard it, with some stark and shockingly bleak lyrics with an incredibly powerful ending punchline, one of the best on the album. And for the hooks, you know what, the Cocaine 80s, they do a pretty damn potent job infusing some of Common's usual brand of soulful production with this mournful darkness that just complements the songs damn near perfectly. Now, outside of Chicago MCs, Jhené Aiko brings some ethereal presence to her verse on Black Magic, especially when she reverses the actual verse itself, and it comes across as really distorted and kind of unsettling. Really good there. And Vince Staples brings a certain sleazy hustler vibe to both The Kingdom and Out on Bond that sounds both authentic and more than a little bit unsettling. And yet, for some reason, the big single for this record features Big Sean, who might be less of an annoying caricature than normal, but he contributes nothing to Diamonds Beyond the Hook, which is probably the worst song in this record because it feels so completely out of place and very token. Even though I did mostly like the production, it just did not work. But then again, it's not the only thing that feels out of place on this record, which takes us to instrumentation and production. Now, look, for the most part, No ID did a stellar job with the production on this record. The beats are murky and thick, the percussion is dusty and textured, the synth, keyboards, and strings are just lo-fi and thin enough along with the samples to augment that dilapidated atmosphere, and the pitch correction and production fuzz is just thick enough on this record to never take away from that underlying soulful vibe, which has always underscored Common's best songs, to just shift it into more of a bleaker tone, which is honestly a really good fit. It's very reminiscent of that last album by The Roots, And Then You Shoot Your Cousin, in terms of its production. And unfortunately, like that album, it occasionally doesn't always stick the landing when it comes to cultivating the atmosphere. I like some of the darker voices at the back of No Fear, but the synth loop on that song was a little bit too flat for my personal taste. And then going on to the Biggie sample on Speak My Peace did not really flow well with the hollow metallic beat. It just kind of felt off rhythm and just didn't quite work there. And the mix on The Kingdom found a little bit too thin and faded for the gospel swell that it was trying to invoke, even though the verses were great, some of the best on the album. Yet probably the most out of place instrumentation on this album was on Real, especially coming after the title track, as the R&B inspired instrumental felt incredibly discordant and out of place with the rougher production on the rest of the record. It's not a bad song, it just didn't fit. Now, that's not saying that there weren't instrumental moments that were absolutely killer that I really loved. I loved the ragged strings on The Neighborhood, the crackling distortion and roiling beat on Black Magic, the grim synths and hollowness, especially in the vocals on the title track, the piano transition on Rewind that was just perfectly timed and damn near heartbreaking, and that thick beat on Hustle Harder has some of the best texture you will hear on a low-end drum sound this year. I was really impressed. I just dug that beat. But of course, like every Common album, it comes down to lyrics and themes. And here's where Common steps into a bit of an odd position, because he never really glorifies the violence inherent on some of those songs and some of that atmosphere, but never directly criticizes it either. For the most part, he simply places it on display and expects us all to judge it, and just tries to write some of the stories around it. And you know, I'm not gonna say he does it badly or falls into the trap of lecturing about subjects that he doesn't understand, but a few of the songs just feel a little bit underweight when it comes to some detailed lyrical subject matter and storytelling, especially compared with some of the stuff that Common has done in the past. Mostly because he comes across as less a participant and more just an observer. The framing is kind of wonky here. Take the opening track, The Neighborhood, where Common just name checks a bunch of gangs and starts to paint an interesting picture there, but then Lil Herb's verse is a lot more detailed and visceral and comes across as way more effective in drawing us into the story. Now, the same thing happens on the title track with Malik Yusef. Not that Common's verses aren't descriptive and potent in their own right, but they just feel a little bit distant and detached from the streets themselves. They just don't feel as grounded there. Now, the two places where he gets a lot closer to that grounded feel is the two songs with Vince Staples. Kingdom, where he creates a character and speaks from that character's perspective who gets gunned down, and Out on Bond, where he describes a guy just out of prison and doing whatever he can to survive. Those are good songs, and they are well framed in that regard. Granted, that's not saying that Common doesn't have other things to say on this album. He has boastful songs like Black Magic and Speak My Peace, the conscious Seven Deadly Sins, which honestly for me felt a little bit played out with the Bible metaphor. Just heard that sort of thing done before and done better. And the anthem of Female Hustler on Hustle Harder, that's both descriptive and a pretty great set of verses all around that's well framed and it's well executed. I really dig that song. But the real highlight of this entire album is Rewind That, the tribute song to legendary producer Jay Dilla that opts for a simple and yet very heartfelt composition that's incredibly powerful, especially in terms of lyrical delivery. I really dug it. But here's my point. While these songs are very good, and from a production standpoint, they feel cohesive with the rest of the album, conceptually, they effectively split this album into between the songs that are just discussing the violence in Chicago and that atmosphere, and then the rest. And the weaker songs mostly fall into the latter category. And it does sort of undercut the message and power of what Common was trying to do with this release, and what could have been a much tighter album as a whole. And you know what, I'll say it. If Common wanted to make that visceral, potent record with all MCs and artists from Chicago, he could have done that. You want to go hard edge to make a real political statement? Get Lupe Fiasco or Gemstones on the album. You want to highlight more upcoming Chicago MCs with more of a gritty feel that actually speak from the streets? You don't have to get Chief Keef. You can get Young Chop or Lil Durk and work with them to make sure you get quality like Lil Herb spit on this record. You don't want that commercial hit. Forget Big Sean. You don't need him, and I can't believe I'm saying this. Try to hammer something out workable with Kanye. It'll take effort to keep him away from talking about Kim or saying something asinine, but given the history between Common and Kanye, I'm certain they could have gotten something radio-friendly out of it, or if he wanted that mainstream hit. Look, my point is that this record doesn't really feel altogether cohesive to me. Individual songs, they really do have some impact, but as a whole, I'm left really feeling underwhelmed by Nobody Smiling by Common. Don't get me wrong, it's far from bad. In fact, it's quite good. Common and No ID bring an impressive standard of quality to the table, as they always do, but I can't help but feel and think that it could have been a little bit better. So as it is, I'm thinking a 7 out of 10 and a recommendation. Common is still a solid MC who delivers potent material, and he delivers a pretty solid chunk of it here. It's not close to his best, and he's made some classic albums, and this album's not going to stand up with those. But you know what? When taking a look at some of the current material dropping in the rap scene these days, I guess I'll take it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, or have already come out this year that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.